of let's go after the wrong people. So, the bill is focused on going after users, going after internet service providers. And of course, I believe that people have a right to their own intellectual property, but why not go after the people who are abusing the copyright instead of actually going after it's a little bit, there's an article in New Scientist that I read recently. I get New Scientist every week, and they were saying in New Scientist it's a little bit like someone owns a photocopier and someone else comes along and photocopies the book, and then you actually prosecute the person who owns the photocopier. I just think it's insane.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of looking at it, actually, yeah, because... And also, it seems hard to regulate. I don't really know how.
It's an issue that I guess, and there's one of the things as well is that it kind of got rushed through at the end of Parliament. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's it's a very complex process, and I'm not going to pretend that I know every single detail of the digital economy bill, but I think it's one of those areas where there are real risks in terms of democracy there. The great thing about the internet is it's enabled people to communicate in a way that's kind of outside the reach of, if you like, this sounds a little bit sinister, but outside the reach of the forces of censorship and oppression. And I think we've absolutely got to preserve that. We've got to preserve and increase the access to the internet, which is what I thought the Labour government were kind of committed to. But the way that they framed this bill, and even the responses from Liberals and Tories about how they would do it differently, to me it kind of smacks. I think there's is it Article 17 of the bill that actually allows the government to just basically change the rules as they go. That's not good legislation.
Okay, well, it's a big issue, and I guess the next party, whoever it is, will be will have a big say in and the people as well when things get back to normal.
You got to protect people who are producing intellectual material, whether it's music or whether it's literature, poetry, or whatever. But it's got to be done in a way that actually works for everybody. Going after users is ridiculous.
Oh, Stevie Wonder on radio. He does long songs, doesn't he? How long is that? Still a minute and a half to go on that. Sorry, Stevie. We've got important things to talk about. One question, Harvey, was... and you mentioned, obviously, as an independent candidate, you mentioned that one of the things kind of motivated you towards it was the whole... the recent stuff with expenses.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff. And obviously... from being an independent candidate, you kind of, I suppose, almost have a little bit of an objective kind of view on that because you're not directly involved in it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the only reason I got involved, but I kind of want to make a link between this and something else that's going on, which is the war in Afghanistan. The expenses scandal, a lot of the current MPs and party candidates are trying to sort of say, well, it was just a kind of like, it's just a blip, basically. It wasn't a blip. It was over 50% of our democratically elected representatives were fiddling their expenses. The current Shadow Chancellor, George Osborne, made a profit of over £700,000 on what was originally a home that he was claiming was his second home. He was claiming expenses. When it came to sell it, suddenly magically became his first home, so he wouldn't have to pay capital gains tax. It's exactly what Sir John Butterfield did down here, the outgoing MP for Bournemouth West. What I want people to remember is that whilst all this was going on, there were kids, same age as a lot of you who are listening to this, out in Afghanistan being killed in a war that's allegedly about fighting for democracy. One of my slogans is "Stop killing people for democracy," and the reason I came up with that slogan is that I don't think we've got any right to go to other countries and try and impose a model of a political model, a model of democracy on other countries when we are such an undemocratic country ourselves. We need to sort out not only the expenses scandal, we need to sort out the scandal of the electoral system, which means that we had an MP who only represented 22% of people in Bournemouth for the last 5 years, who lived in a mansion in Surrey, just one other point that I want to make. One of the reasons, that I'm still angry about this. I'm 53 years old and I'm still an angry young man. I mentioned the moon landings earlier in 1969. I also remember in the 60s and early 70s, every night on television, watching the Americans bomb the crap out of North Vietnam, and that was a war allegedly for democracy. And I just also want to point out one difference between the Labour Party then and the Labour Party now. In the 60s, Dennis Denis Healey and Harold Wilson, I think quite heroically managed to resist huge amount of pressure from President Johnson to get involved in the Vietnam War, which is one of the most disastrous wars for the West in history. Somehow Tony Blair, somehow Gordon Brown succumbed to George Bush, and I thought it was incredible that Gordon Brown turned up at the Chilcot inquiry into the Iraq War a couple of months ago, and he actually said, I never bought into the neoconservative proposition that you can impose democracy down the barrel of a gun. Well, where were you, Gordon, in 2001, 2002, 2003 when our troops were going into Afghanistan and Iraq? Why didn't you say something then? Because you're in a political party, because of the party whip system, maybe because you wanted to be Prime Minister. So, this is why I think it's really important that we get a smattering of independents into Parliament, to really stand up to the party whips, to really push for a hung Parliament as well, to get a much fairer, much more democratic system of electoral politics. End of rant. We've got a situation where we can have a huge number of people seeking asylum in this country. Now you have to ask yourself, what's wrong with the rest of the world? And what are we standing for in the rest of the world? Every time we go into countries like Afghanistan, like Iraq, every time we and the Americans interfere in other countries, are we actually making it more or less likely that oppression's going to continue? If you look at the behaviour of the states after the 9/11 disaster in New York, did they actually stand up and make a kind of moral stand against terrorism, against torture, against kidnapping? No, they actually got involved in terrorism, torture and kidnapping themselves. And I think how we behave is really important, particularly in this country. This is supposed to be the home of democracy. Parliament's often referred to the mother of all parliaments. Well, it kind of hasn't seemed like that for the last 10 years. And I think it's time we set a much higher standard. And then maybe, immigration will be, over time, I think it'll take a long time, but over time will become more manageable. Just want to mention one other brief issue about immigration. Labour Party have got it wrong in Bournemouth because if you look at Tier 4 of their point system, they've now made it necessary for you to have an intermediate level of English to come to Bournemouth to study English. This is having a devastating effect in Bournemouth. This town takes £200 million in revenue from foreign students every year. I've spoken to language school directors about this. Some of them are saying they're going to have to shut down unless we change this. A lot of the people that the public see out in the street who they think are immigrants, and a lot of them just assume that means illegal immigrants, they're foreign students who are bringing £10,000 to £20,000 per person into this town. And if they go, it will devastate the economy. It will devastate the 10,000 families who are host families who make £3 or £4 grand a year out of it. It will devastate the retail trade. It will devastate the tourism trade. So we have to be very careful what we say about immigration. This is not as simple as a lot of people think, just illegal foreigners coming over and stealing our jobs. Quite the reverse sometimes.
Sure, yeah. That's it's an interesting subject.
It's an interesting viewpoint on it, actually, not one that we've heard before.
Well, it's a very local sort of. It's an interesting local perspective on things as well, isn't it?
It's a huge issue. My sister, my schoolmates, they all worked in language schools. One of my schoolmates went off and set up a language school in Brazil after he kind of trained EFL students, English for foreign language students, and it's the bedrock of the economy of this town, along with tourism. So we need a much more flexible approach to the whole issue. Foreign students aren't economic migrants. We need to make a differentiation.
So I suppose as we've not got too long left, I suppose we should ask you really to kind of give us your pitch, as it were, your big.
Okay, well, I've probably expressed a few things that I'm still angry about after 40 years and so on of being interested in politics. But I want to say something really positive. I genuinely believe in representative democracy. I actually think this election is more than anything else. It is about democratic representation. We have the first real opportunity for decades in this country to not just get a hung parliament, but I want to be clear what that means to people. It will mean a change to the electoral system, which some of us have been desperate for 30, 40 years. It means that if the Liberal Democrats hold the balance of power, and I'm not saying vote for them, but if they hold the balance of power, we will get change. We'll get something like the alternative vote system or the single transferable vote system, which will enable people's vote to actually matter, which will give people back a voice. Now, I'm trying to play my part in Bournemouth. I've written to all four candidates. I've invited them to join this cross-party cooperation group. Lib Dems and UKIP, to their credit, have already said yes, they'll sign up to it. Conor Burns, I've got a request for you. Sharon Carl-Brown in the Labour Party, I've got a request for you. Sign up for it. You said at the hustings that you would put the electorate and your conscience before your party whips. Let's see some evidence. Sign up for the cross-party cooperation group. I want to take the whole of Bournemouth West to Westminster.